Hello, welcome to Foreign Entanglements. I'm Matt Duss, and with the Center for American Progress. With me again, my friend Meir Javedanfar, speaking to us from Tel Aviv. How are you, Meir?
Very well, thank you, Matt. Hello, and it's almost Shabbat Shalom from Tel Aviv.
Shabbat Shalom. Well, thanks for doing this.
Pleasure.
We had a new IAEA report, or that will be coming out. People have seen it. There were a number of comments and stories on it already. Do you want to give just a basic briefing on what you see in the report?
Well, I think the most notable thing is that the Iranians are going to increase the number of centrifuges at Fordo, and this is really for now a setback for those who advocate diplomacy, because this is basically going to strengthen both fringes to this argument. One fringe being that, look, sanctions are not working, diplomacy is not working. This report, obviously, they're going to use it to say that it's futile, so we got to go with the war option. Mm-hmm. And the other fringe being that, well, you see, sanctions are not working. You got to just go back and offer more compromises to Iran. And there's no point, sanctioning Iran, because it's obviously not working, and the regime is improving its nuclear capabilities. And this is basically this is what concerns me, that both of these fringes are going to become strengthened. I think they're both wrong. War is not going to solve this issue. It's going to make it worse. And I think, as history has shown, President Obama tried to reach out to the Iranian regime on a number of occasions. In fact, it is my firm belief that on balance, no other U.S. president since 1979 has tried so hard to reach out to Iran. Mm-hmm. It wasn't reciprocal. The Iranians did not reciprocate, and basically going back and just offering more incentives or just talking without pressure is not going to work.
I think you're right there, and it does strengthen the argument of those who claim that sanctions aren't enough, as Bibi Netanyahu being foremost among them. Even though, interestingly, he seems to have kind of this contradictory argument that we need more sanctions faster, but sanctions will never do the job. It's kind of an internal contradiction of his own argument. But what I thought was interesting, and others such as Daryl Kimball at the Arms Control Association have noted, the Arms Control Association put out a very good, just brief analysis of the report yesterday, was that even though Iran has increased the rate at which it's enriching to 20%, it's also been transferring or converting that uranium into fuel rods faster as well. So the overall amount of 20% enriched uranium has not really grown.
That's something that unfortunately we don't hear enough, and that's very important for our viewers to note, that once that enriched uranium is turned into a fuel rod, you can't use it to make a bomb anymore.
Right.
And that's basically put beyond use for a potential bomb, because that's just not going to be convertible. I mean, the only scenario where that could be used for a bomb is if Iran makes a nuclear power reactor, feeds that enriched uranium, and takes the residue from that to make a bomb. But as we know, Iran is a decade away. The government is a decade away from building a nuclear reactor. So I think that's very important. So what really concerns me, Matt, is this argument in Israel. It's becoming, not in Israel actually that's not accurate. I think in the Jewish community abroad, in the United States especially, is becoming a very much an identity issue. I was speaking to somebody who was visiting from abroad. He was telling me that in the U.S., if you don't support the military option against Iran, it's like you're being disloyal to the state of Israel, which I think it's not accurate, because here in Israel there are many people, red-blooded Israelis who live here, they've got their families here, and they're against this option. Mostly because it would be more damaging to Israel, but I think it's something that's we have to keep the conversation sane and above, keep it above water level. It's very important, because right now I actually think the Iranians are scoring more own goals. With this new assessment now out by the IAEA, they're basically going to make President Obama even more determined to isolate them before the elections. So it's not the situation is not beyond help in any way.
Right. No, I think you raise a really important point there with regard to Iran becoming an identity issue. and unfortunately in a similar way that just general disagreements and debates over Israel and the occupation of the Palestinian issue often become, there's, red lines about what you can and can't believe to be a true friend of Israel. I think we've seen, we have this sort of back and forth between Alan Dershowitz and J Street, in which Dershowitz, as he does, in his way, kind of mendaciously misrepresenting J Street's positions on Iran, in order to try and paint J Street as insufficiently supportive of Israel. But what's interesting, J Street, he specifically calls out J Street for an ad in which J Street merely quotes Israeli security officials, with regard to their objections to a unilateral Israeli strike. So I think that goes to, some of the unfortunate stuff that we hear, saying that you cannot believe A and be a true supporter of Israel. I think, and we have groups like the Emergency Committee for Israel doing the same things, saying, Obama hasn't done enough on Iran, it's because he doesn't support Israel enough, but as you said, and as you and I have discussed in the past, when it comes to the Iran issue, Obama has just been enormously supportive.
Obama's caused more damage to the Iranian regime in 4 years than Bush did in 8 years. Let's look at the Iranian economy within the last 4 years in terms of the sanctions, the regime interests. It is far weaker than it was in 2008. They're exporting 50% less oil. Let's look at China and Russia today. They are singing from the same hymn sheet as the United States in the P5+1 talks with Iran, whereas before 2008 they were singing more from the Iranian hymn sheet, against the West. Again, I'm not in any way, nobody holds the monopoly of the truth here. We all have different opinions. I have tremendous respect for Mr. Dershowitz. I think he's a very smart person, and to be honest with you, no matter where your opinion lies on the Israel-Palestine issue, I, as somebody who lives in Israel, I find it electrifying to see somebody who lives abroad and loves this country with such intense passion. It's just that his enthusiasm and his love for Israel is catchy. It's unbelievable. But I think, to say that we should hold off on the military option in Iran does not mean that you love Israel any less in any way, shape, or form. I've never heard anybody anywhere in the Jewish community, J Street or otherwise, to say, oh, what the Iranians are doing, okay, let's just leave them at it. No. I think the issue has to be more nuanced, and as we see, the Iranian government is doing a very good job of isolating itself, as we saw from the NAM conference, Matt. If I can move to that, I saw a historical event yesterday, which the press did not pick up. It was in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran, 1979. There has never been a foreign official who went to Iran, went to Tehran, went to Khamenei's office, sat in front of him, and lambasted his Israeli policy. It's not happened ever until Ban Ki-moon did it. And this is historical, and it basically shows the world is with Israel on Iran. It's tremendous. It's really tremendous.
Right, no, I've seen some pickup on this. There was the AP, there was the New York Times, the Washington Post, all had stories about Ban Ki-moon's meeting with Supreme Leader Khamenei.
The historical impact, though, the fact that they didn't mention that it was historical.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I think, I was kind of surprised when I first heard that Ban Ki-moon would be going. I think, there were some reports that actually Netanyahu's criticism of that decision,
which is understandable up to a certain way, but, I think we went a bit, but as we can see that the concern were not justified because Ban Ki-moon did a tremendous job when he was in Iran.
No, I think it does point to a real sort of, disconnect or just disagreement about the impact of diplomacy. I think Netanyahu's criticism and people who agreed with him, kind of hold to the position that any kind of treatment of Iran, acknowledgement of Iran by someone like Ban Ki-moon, just the very fact that Ban Ki-moon would go to Tehran physically, was a propaganda victory for Iran. Whereas my view, and I think the view of many others, was precisely this is the reason, Ban Ki-moon should have gone. to use that. Sure, he represented the UN, he went to Tehran, but then he used that power, that influence, to criticize Iran on the nuclear issue, on its statements about Israel, on the human rights front, and I think that's a hugely positive thing.
Absolutely, and as we saw last night from the Republican convention, empty chairs don't hold intellectual discussions and cannot really express their opinions, and an empty chair of Ban Ki-moon in Tehran would not have served the interest of those who want to basically condemn the Iranian regime's Israel policy. Right. And also, I have to say, Matt, something phenomenal is happening in our house, in our household. Typical Persian Israeli household in Israel. Mohamed Morsi is turning into a hero for my parents. This doesn't usually happen that an Egyptian leader becomes a hero for an Iranian Israeli family, but it's tremendous what he did in Tehran yesterday with regards to Syria also, which is again unbelievable, really. Yeah. The way the way the Iranian regime changed the translation when they were translating his speech from Farsi, from Arabic to Farsi.
Why don't you just give our viewers a little bit of background about what Morsi did in Tehran?
President Morsi went to Tehran as the former head. Egypt was the former head of the NAM. They handed it over to Iran, and basically he said that the Syrian regime oppresses its own people and has lost all legitimacy, and the Iranian government did not translate the parts when they were attacking Bashar al-Assad. There's also reports that the Syrians walked out. There are some reports that the Syrians walked out when he was saying that, and the editor of the Risalat newspaper in Iran, which is very close to the government, in an interview with this Iranian reporter abroad, her name is Masih Hadinejad, who I think she's a tremendous reporter, she deserves a plug definitely. She said, they were just going to the toilet, that the Syrians were just going to the loo. They didn't get up and leave. And then she asked them what? The entire Syrian delegation got up at the same time to go to the loo? Everybody together? And then the guy basically, his answer was all muffled, and he says, these are all lies, it never happened. Well, it goes to show diplomacy works, and it goes to show also for the Iranian government that big fancy conferences are no substitute for bad policy.
Right, and it's clear the Iranians invested an enormous amount, both financially, diplomatically, politically, in this conference. It's kind of the capstone initiative of a whole range of initiatives they've taken with their diplomacy over the past couple months to kind of to ease their growing isolation over the nuclear program. But on the whole, even though there's been a lot of noise over this, I'd say on the whole it's been a net negative for Iran. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It started really well, but as soon as the Iranian press and Ahmadinejad were falling over themselves about especially Morsi coming to Iran, they said it's a victory for Iran. It shows Iran is not isolated. It shows that Morsi is against America, against the state of Israel, and it basically wasn't that didn't turn out that way. And what's really interesting is there's a report in the Iranian side, Intikhab News, which I believe it's close to Mr. Rafsanjani, in which it says that Mohamed Morsi started his speech by referring to the 4 Sunni replacements after the Prophet Muhammad. This is something that I don't know if the Sunnis usually do it. To be honest with you, I don't know. But some people, because when you emphasize those 4, it means that you're trying to. It's kind of seen as an insult by some religious Shiites that you're just referring to those and you're not referring to the 12 imams afterwards. And they're basically saying that he started that way by referring to the 4 Sunni followers of Prophet Muhammad who basically took the helm after his death, and the Iranian government did not react, and the Iranian government was not offended, and he did what he did. And to be honest with you, I have to say that I think Morsi went there for his own selfish purposes, and I think he was also trying to play to his Saudi host, which he did very well.
So if we can just spending one more minute on the UN and Ban Ki-moon, I think going back to that disagreement over the impact of diplomacy, I had a piece last week that looked at the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights on Iran, how I think that it demonstrated, it's made, according to Iranian human rights activists, it's actually made a very positive impact in Iran. Hundreds of Iranians have stepped forward to have their testimonies recorded, even though Mr. Shahid, the special rapporteur, has not yet been allowed into the country to do his work. He's still been able to work with and talk to numerous Iranian human rights activists. And I think this is obviously human rights are an important issue in and of themselves, but it's another very important form of pressure on the Iranian government, above and beyond the economic sanctions and the political sanctions that have been placed on various Iranian regime figures. So I think it vindicates, in my view, the Obama administration's re-engagement, specifically on the UN Human Rights Council, but also in the broader sense, just this idea of working within the international system, multilateral organizations, to kind of nest America's goals, in this case being pressuring Iran to change its behavior on the nuclear program, nesting those goals within a larger, kind of more legitimate international framework. And again, I think that's a real difference you have between Obama and his more conservative critics like Romney and like Netanyahu, whose view is, this is all just a big waste of time and we should just push forward unilaterally if we have to.
Well, to be honest with you, Matt, I don't get the feeling that Mr. Romney is so enthusiastic about an attack against Iran. I didn't hear him last night in Tampa sounding so enthusiastic. And to be honest with you, again, you live in the United States, you know this better than I do. Would Romney support an attack against Iran prior to the elections, whereby the price of oil jumps to 200%, causes massive damage to the U.S. economy, and then if Romney is elected, he has to deal with that mess? Would you want to take over? Would you want to win the presidency of a country whose economy is going to be in such a state? I'm not so sure. What do you think?
No, I agree with that. I'm not saying that Romney is supporting an Israeli attack or would support an American attack. I'm talking more specifically about a general kind of critique of diplomatic engagement and a kind of his vision of what American leadership in the world really looks like. It harkens back to, it's a much more first-term George W. Bush sort of, we go about, we do what we want because we're America, and that's what American leadership is. It's just kind of us going out there and telling people what to do. Whereas I think Obama's vision is much different. It involves a kind of the slower, more grinding work of diplomacy and actually working with partners, still trying to implement our interests, but understanding that, embedding those interests and goals within a larger multilateral framework is a huge force multiplier for our ability to get things done.
Well, one thing that worries me is that when Mr. Romney talks about China and Russia in a hostile way, that if he's elected, he's going to take a more, let's just say, he's going to change America's current attitude towards them. If you do that, you're going to push Russia and China back into the Iranian camp.
Yeah.
Israel and the U.S. did a lot to pull Russia away from Iran's camp. America, basically, you guys scrapped that missile shield system in Poland and Czech Republic, and there was a START treaty. And in Israel, we also had to do our work. Israel had to stop supporting Georgia.
Yeah.
Russia's adversary. We said, okay, we'll stop selling to the Georgians if you stop, helping Iran and giving them military equipment and supporting Iran, and it worked. The Russians now, it's really unbelievable how they've changed, and that would be a shame. That would be a really big shame if you take a confrontational attitude with Russia, because the Russians are also at a point where I think they are using the international consensus against Iran to basically milk Iran for all they can get. But also to get points from the United States. And I think this is a sensitive juncture, and this is something that should be left alone.
Right. No, I think that's right, but I think that kind of goes to what I was saying earlier. It's a view of foreign policy and of American diplomacy that, it says very simply, okay, well, Russia's bad, we don't approve of Russia, so we are going to confront Russia on all of these things, and just simply really denies that there are any trade-offs here. And I think, Obama's view, recognizes that there's trade-offs. Yes, we don't like the way Russia's behaving in a lot of respects. It doesn't respect freedom of the press. there is a lack of political freedom in Russia, but we need to work with Russia to get other things done. It's just a question of priorities.
It's a very important tool. I think Moscow is very important in our toolbox in terms of dealing with Iran. And when you have the Russians giving the Iranian ambassador 3 hours to close his bank accounts because of the sanctions, that the Iranians really got to worry about what's going on here with Russia. And also, let's not forget, Bushehr is not completed yet. 11 years late. I don't know which contractor or plumber in Washington D.C. could get away being 11 years late and still getting paid and still not getting booted out. Right. But the Russians are still there and it's still not finished. And they are basically milking Iran for all they can get, which, as an Iranian, I find that shameful, to be honest with you. Iran could have a much smarter policy where they could play the Russians and the Americans against each other in order to get the maximum national interest, to serve the national interest of Iran. But the more you look at this regime is not really interested in the national interest of Iran. It's much more the regime interests. We see it happening now with India. Yeah, it's great. Of course, I can understand why the Iranians are getting close to India because of their economic interests. But you have to be, Khamenei has to be careful about not isolating Pakistan too much. The Pakistanis are not going to like this, and just going haphazardly from one partner to another without considering the consequences. This is what's happening to Iran these days. Today, it's all enthusiastic about India. Tomorrow, God knows if the Indians are going to continue supporting Iran because of American pressure. And also, as I said, Pakistan, I don't think the Iranian regime should isolate or go against Pakistan. It's a very important neighbor, and as we've seen in the past, they have the potential and the propensity to make trouble for the Iranian regime.
If we could just move to a last topic quickly. I think we've kind of reached the end of the wave, the latest wave of talk about a possible Israeli strike on Iran, and I'm starting to wonder. I mean, what's the impact of us constantly going through these episodes of Israeli leaders saying, we have to do something, having these debates in the Israeli press, and then you've got parades of American security officials going over to Israel to calm things down and to reassure Israeli leaders, yes, we've got your back, but don't do anything, don't act too soon. I mean, is it creating a kind of irreversible momentum toward military action, do you think, by someone, either Israel or the United States?
I just wrote a blog on this, on my new blog, the Iran-Israel Observer, if you forgive me for using the opportunity to plug. It's my new baby project.
All right, we'll put up a link to it.
It's the musings of an Iranian Israeli. As somebody who was born in Iran, lived there till the age of 14 after the revolution also, and now living in Israel, I see a lot of contrasts and similarities, which I thought I had to share with everybody. No Israeli leader could ignore Iran. If the late Yitzhak Rabin, who God knows we miss him and we need him, were alive today, he would also have to address the Iranian threat, the Iranian government threat. The way the Iranian regime is behaving is very irresponsible, constant threats. It has to be dealt with. But I think that the threats that we see in Israel are basically making people lose sleep at. I've got friends who are having nightmares here, living here. I've got friends who are abroad. They're asking me whether they should come back. There are people thinking of going abroad for the summer. It's really reaching fever pitch. It's one thing to say that all options are on the table, but the way the government is doing it right now, I think the government in Israel is handing Khamenei a victory on a plate. Silver platter, I would say even. It's with Khamenei doesn't have to do anything, and the Israeli people are living in fear, which is a shame, really. I think it's Khamenei's regime who has to live in fear because of what the sanctions are doing to it and how they're ravaging the regime's income. This is something that has to be changed. If Israel wants to say all options are on the table, fine. Let's say it less frequently, not such hysteria. There's also private channels of communication. Use those. It's impacting the lives of Israeli citizens, and it's impacting Israel's economy because let's just put it that way. If you were a foreign investor who wants to build a factory in Israel, would you want to do it now with all these war threats? Not many people want to, and this is a shame. I think that Israel, we have to work with the United States. We have to address this issue. President Obama said clearly at the AIPAC speech that he has no containment policy when it comes to Iran. And basically that means that he's not going to let Iran make nuclear weapon. And he's not going to allow them. But I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has doubts. I can't put it any other way. They have doubts about Obama. They, it seems to me, want a firmer commitment. I don't know exactly in what format, but I think it is possible that they want a deadline from him to say they want him. Again, this is only my assumption. I could be wrong. But perhaps they want him to say that, to the Iranians, as a pure example, that by the 25th of October you either stop all enrichment at Fordo or there could be military option. Something along those lines. As I said, that's just an example, which I think would be unrealistic. No president is going to give that. Mr. Romney, even if he's elected, he can't do that. I just think there's a lot of lack of confidence in the Israeli administration of Mr. Netanyahu with regards to President Obama. I think it goes back to him when he challenged Prime Netanyahu's settlement policies, and whether it's going to make the situation irreversible, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I've always said war is unlikely, and one of the biggest reasons is I think if we do it without the U.S. Backing, then it could basically hurt our relationship with you guys. But you never know with Netanyahu; he could just attack. You don't know, and this is what worries me.
So you think even with all the I would call it virtually unanimous opposition on the part of the security establishment, he and Barak could still just decide to go for it?
To be honest with you, it's going to it's going to be very difficult for them to convince the security cabinet. But Netanyahu and Barak seem to be really determined, and this is what really worries me. They changed the way the security cabinet makes decisions. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu, they voted that way. Netanyahu just didn't do it himself. They voted to change it. Now Netanyahu has the power to cancel meetings, to repeatedly put something on the agenda. For example, they have on one meeting they have an agenda on the agenda whether we should attack Iran or not, and this cabinet says no. Okay. In the next agenda, he could bring it up, and if they say no again, he can bring it up in the next meeting. He just continue to do that, and this is what worries me. I'm certainly hoping that he's not going to use that to make a war against Iran, because that would basically help the regime make motivate it even more to make a bomb, and this is a regime that I think the sanctions could ultimately overthrow it, because of there could be an existential threat. So, and also I see the overwhelming international support for Israel, and I just think look at Ban Ki-moon. I mean, in Israel we say dugri, the Israeli sense of directness, to say something to somebody's face. Ban Ki-moon was an absolute Israeli in Khamenei's office. I mean, this is unbelievable. In Israel we pride ourselves for telling people what we think, no holds barred. Ban Ki-moon did what every Israeli diplomat dreams of in Khamenei's office. So, we have to take that sign that yes, no, we don't want a nuclear Iran, but let's not forget the world is with Israel. Let's use that to our advantage, and let's put our worries into context, because I see it now, it's becoming like a runaway train in this country.
One last quick point before we finish up. Coming back to the difference between the U.S. and Israeli red lines, Israel and Netanyahu and others in the Israeli government has said we cannot permit a nuclear weapons capable Iran. It's the capability that's the problem. Whereas President Obama and others in his administration have said the American red line is an Iranian nuclear weapon. And there's been a lot of discussion over the differences between these two red lines. So essentially, Obama's just saying they can have the capability, but once we get information or see intelligence, they are making a dash for a nuclear weapon. That's when we'll very possibly see action. Is that tension between the two red lines? Is that something that you think just is sustainable, or is there going to be have to be a confrontation over that difference at some point?
First, let's put that into context. The issue here is that over Fordo, that whether Iran is going to have enough enriched uranium to make a bomb. To be honest with you, the capability is one thing to make enriched uranium, and you have reason to be concerned when it's 20%. You can't just dismiss it, because the distance from 3.5% enriched uranium to 20% enriched uranium is far bigger than the distance from 20% to 90%, which is for weapons grade. So the concern is justified. However, just because the Iranians have that at 20% enriched uranium, it doesn't give them necessarily the capability to make a bomb, because Iran has not tested many other, as far as we know, Iran has not tested the many other stages which are required to make a bomb. So let's just give an example. Tomorrow Iran decides to kick out the international inspectors from Fordo, stop all inspections, and wants to transfer all the enriched uranium to make a bomb. First of all, that's going to be a glaringly obvious red line that Iran wants to make a bomb, which could mean a military strike, number one. Number two, it doesn't mean that Iran has the capability to make that into a bomb anytime soon, because they have to develop the trigger. We know that they were working on it, but we don't know if they mastered it. They have to mold the uranium into a warhead, first of all, to make it into a bomb and then put it on a warhead. And there's necessarily no guarantee that it would work. There's many other stages. So I would say, the nuclear capable Iran is, as much as we don't want them to have the 20% enriched uranium at Fordo, and we want the regime to stop, I don't think that as a red line that Iran is going to be close to making a bomb, because from enriched uranium to bomb, first of all, it's going to trigger many alarms in the West, so that could mean a war, and the regime understands that. And number two, I think the regime has suffered a lot of setbacks recently, and I don't think it necessarily has the capability to make that bomb within a space of a year, or even maximum perhaps 2 years, and that's plenty of time to gather international consensus to send a strong message to the Iranian government. And to be absolutely honest with you, I don't think Khamenei would do it. Yeah. He's as much as he's an ideologue, I think, in terms of he doesn't want relations with the US and Israel, I think he's going to have a very hard time justifying such a move to his IRGC advisors and his IRGC supporters, that that he's going to do it knowing full well that it could trigger an attack against the Iranian regime. And in this case, by kicking out the IAEA inspector, such an attack would have more legitimacy in the international community than a unilateral attack by Israel while the IAEA is there and conducting all the different inspections.
All right, Meir, thanks so much. Always great to talk to you.
Thank you.
All
Likewise.
Right, talk to you again soon.
Thank you.